In this episode, we talk about the recent anti-Muslim remarks made by the Allahabad High Court judge Justice Shekhar Kumar Yadav. We also talk about the controversy involving a 19-year-old B.Tech student who duped a top US university and was later exposed after bragging about it. But first, we talk about the ongoing Ambedkar controversy. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Right now, opposition parties across the country are demanding the removal of Home Minister Amit Shah from the cabinet because of remarks he made in the Rajya Sabha on Tuesday. These parties, which have been staging protests and raising slogans in both houses of parliament, have accused Shah of insulting Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, India's first law minister and the chairman of the committee that drafted the Indian constitution. Almost every major opposition parties, including the Congress, TMC, SP, AAP and the Shiv Sena UBT, has issued strong statements condemning Shah's remarks and continues to pressure the Prime Minister to take action on the matter. We are now joined by the Indian Express's Vikas Pathak to discuss what exactly led to this controversy.
Yeah, so basically the parliament was witness to a 4-day discussion on the constitution. 2 days in the Lok Sabha, after that 2 days in the Rajya Sabha. So in this discussion, while the tone and tenor of, the Congress leadership like Priyanka Gandhi was more about how there's an atmosphere of fear or naming an industrialist for whom all the policies are being done, apparently. So what the government side did in both houses was that they attacked the Congress and the Congress in power over 65-70 years and said that the Congress did everything possible to damage the constitution and to insult Dr. Ambedkar. This was the prime charge of the treasury benches, and they talked about Ambedkar's resignation as law minister. They talked about the emergency. They talked about the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act that was done during the emergency. So they tried to argue that it was the Congress that tried to damage the constitution. And they also claimed that most of the constitutional amendments that the Congress governments steered were aimed at, serving the greed for power of the party and of its first family. This was the core argument.
आपने अमेंडमेंट किस लिए किया था? 39 कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन अमेंडमेंट क्यों किया? वो इलाहाबाद हाई कोर्ट ने जो इंदिरा गांधी जी के खिलाफ जजमेंट दिया, उसको बदलने के लिए आपने संविधान को आपने 42nd अमेंडमेंट क्यों किया? संविधान को, जो प्रीएम्बल को बदलने के लिए आपने 42nd अमेंडमेंट संविधान को किया है. हमने संविधान.
So in the same breath, it was Home Minister Amit Shah who was attacking the Congress in his reply in the Rajya Sabha, and the opposition latched on to two sentences that he made and took them apart from the speech itself and said that he had insulted Dr. Ambedkar. Yeah, so I'll translate it and quote it verbatim, as it were, translate it exactly. So Amit Shah, during his speech, said, looking at the opposition benches, he said that there's a fashion these days, Ambedkar, 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 Ambedkar. And then he said, had you chanted the name of God these many times, you would have been blessed with heaven in 7 births.
मान्यवर, अभी एक फैशन हो गया है. आम्बेडकर, 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 आम्बेडकर. इतना नाम अगर भगवान का लेते तो 7 जन्मों तक स्वर्ग मिल जाता.
Now this exactly is what the opposition latched on to. But then it's also important to know what Amit Shah said after that. Just after that, he said, we are happy that Ambedkar's name is being taken. Take it 100 times more. But I'll tell you in reality what your attitude towards Dr. Ambedkar was. And then he starts asking, why did Ambedkar resign from the first cabinet? He said quite a few times that he was dissatisfied with the behavior of the Congress government with SCs and STs, and that he was in disagreement with the government's foreign policy and Article 370. he wanted to quit. He was given assurances that were not honored. So being ignored, he resigned. Then he says that B.C. Roy, Bidhan Chand Roy, who was the first Chief Minister of Bengal, asked Nehru what the impact of the resignation of Ambedkar and C. Rajagopalachari would be. And then Amit Shah quoted Nehru as saying that while there could be some adverse effect of Rajaji leaving, Ambedkar's exit would not weaken the cabinet at all.
श्री B.C. रॉय ने पत्र लिखा कि अंबेडकर और राजाजी जैसे दो महानुभाव मंत्रिमंडल छोड़ेंगे तो क्या होगा। तो नेहरू जी ने उनको जवाब में लिखा है, राजाजी के जाने से तो थोड़ा बहुत नुकसान होगा, अंबेडकर के जाने से मंत्रिमंडल कमजोर नहीं होता है।
And after this, the treasury benches, went up in unison saying shame, shame. So then Amit Shah also said that why do you use for votes the one you always opposed? So basically Amit Shah was trying to project the Congress as anti-Ambedkar, as having insulted Ambedkar repeatedly. And the Congress picked up those two sentences that I mentioned, saying that the kind of callous way in which he referred to Ambedkar also showed that, he is anti-Ambedkar and therefore he should resign as Home Minister. And K.C. Venugopal even tweeted that because Amit Shah had said, had you chanted the name of God these many times, you would have been blessed with heaven in 7 births. He said that Ambedkar is equivalent to God. And this kind of language about Ambedkar is unacceptable. However, when you actually look at the whole speech, look at what he said after that or before that, it was Amit Shah accusing the Congress of having been anti-Ambedkar and of having insulted Ambedkar. And the Congress, countered it by quoting these two sentences as saying that Amit Shah had insulted Ambedkar.
Right, and the very next day, both houses of parliament were stalled and you had multiple opposition parties, like we said, demanding Amit Shah's removal from the cabinet. Could you talk about the reason why the opposition has once again chosen to target the BJP on this issue?
Look, the thing is, there's a whole chain of events leading to this. It was last year that the Congress decided to raise caste and reservations as its prime poll plank. And they also said that, we'll breach the 50% cap on reservations. We'll give proportionate representation to communities, the disadvantaged communities. And then they said for that, we need a caste census. So obviously, the Congress thought that the kind of quote-unquote Hindu vote bank in large parts of India that the BJP has been able to cobble up could be fractured around the caste fault line. So this was what they thought. And then they also used the statement of the Prime Minister that his figure for the Lok Sabha was 370 for BJP and 400 for NDA. And then came the slogan, Ab ki baar 400 par. And then the opposition said that they want 400 plus so as to change the constitution and end reservation. After that, the BJP fell to 240 seats and the Congress went up to 99 seats. So this became a kind of the life of the entire caste-centric or reservation-centric narrative got extended. So the Congress thought it had an opening. The BJP thought that, yes, the Congress may have had an opening. So both the parties started talking a lot about Dr. Ambedkar, about reservations, about caste, about the social justice. And after that, the BJP, of course, could wrest Haryana and Maharashtra from the Congress and thereby halt the Congress, forward march. Now things are almost back to square one as they were. But that convinces the BJP on the one hand to always come across with a narrative where they accuse the Congress of being anti-reservation, anti-Dalit, anti-tribal, anti-OBC. And the Congress still thinks that this is the way that they can hit out at the BJP, using reservation and caste.
Okay, so on one hand, you have the Congress, which is saying that, look, these remarks show that the BJP and the RSS have a lot of hatred for Ambedkar. They have even burned effigies of Baba Sahib. And on the other hand, you have the Prime Minister saying that it was the Congress which obliterated his legacy. And he even posted a series of tweets saying that, look, here are the Congress's sins towards Ambedkar. Could you talk about what was actually the Congress and the RSS's relationship with Ambedkar?
Yeah, so that's a very complex relationship because, look, the Janasangh was formed just a few years before the death of Dr. Ambedkar. The RSS had been there, but the RSS had been a very small organization. Ambedkar and Savarkar happened to know each other. Their relations were, so far as I know, not really very bad, nor really very good. Because, again, Savarkar was not in a condition where he could effect many policy decisions. So Ambedkar came up as a voice, that talked about the Dalits who were then called the depressed classes in the colonial parlance, and he was a tough negotiator to ensure greater representation for them, right? So he demanded separate electorates, and the British agreed to that. And Mahatma Gandhi thought that separate electorates could actually divide the society, or Hindu society in particular, because separate electorates basically was, the idea was that not just would there be reservation of seats like we have today, rather there would be dual constituencies where in a reserved constituency only the reserved category people could vote. That is the whole thing. So the candidate as well as the voter had to be from the same category, which would mean that there would be Dalit seats where the Dalits would be voters and the Dalits would be a candidate. So Ambedkar thought that the more assertive and autonomous Dalits would be elected by an exclusively Dalit, electorate. While Mahatma Gandhi thought that, okay, we can give reservation of seats where seats would be reserved where only the candidate alone, or the candidate would certainly be Dalit, no one else could contest, but the voters had to be the general electorate. So eventually, after Gandhi's fast unto death, which went up to, if memory serves me right, around 21 days, after that, there was a compromise, the Pune Pact, where Ambedkar, because globally there were fears that Gandhi might die in the fast unto death. So eventually, Ambedkar agreed. And the Pune Pact, provided political reservation. So if you ask me what is the genesis of the reservation policy being accepted by the freedom struggle and the Indian National Congress, which was to form the first government after independence, that was the Gandhian compromise that said, okay, reservation will be there, but the electorate would be a general electorate. All the voters could cast their vote in a reserved seat. So separate electorates was rejected. So reservation is in that sense a Gandhian compromise that happened.
Right, and Ambedkar was in fact very disappointed by this. He was very critical of Gandhi, and he even thought his fasting was actually quite manipulative.
Yeah, he said there was nothing noble about the fast, it was a vile thing. That's what he said precisely. So after that, when the British were leaving India and India was becoming independent, then it was Mahatma Gandhi himself who told Nehru that Dr. Ambedkar should be in the first cabinet, and he became India's first law minister. So after that, he also did business with the Congress. He did business with the Congress as law minister for a few years. He was the chairman of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution. So as the member of the Constituent Assembly and as the chairman of the drafting committee, he had interactions with Nehru, with Patel, with Rajendra Prasad, all these people. So it was a very complex relationship. Ambedkar and Nehru were on the same page so far as the Hindu Code Bill was concerned. But Ambedkar resigned from the cabinet because there was a lot of opposition to the Hindu Code Bill, which was reforming, introducing gender reforms in the Hindu personal laws. And Ambedkar wanted it expedited at any cost. Nehru went a bit slow because of the opposition coming even from within the Congress. So Ambedkar resigned in a huff, saying that, Pandit Nehru had said that he would sail or sink with this reform, but it seems that they are going too slow. So Ambedkar resigned, but to be fair to Nehru, after the resignation of Ambedkar, Nehru eventually got the Hindu Code Bill passed. And gender reforms in terms of, abolition of polygamy or property rights to daughters, all these became a reality for the Hindu community. So it was a very complex relation.
And what about the RSS? We know that the organization was against the Hindu Code. A group of RSS workers had burned the effigies of both Nehru and Ambedkar as a way to protest it. But how central were they in all of this back then?
Yeah, so far as, the BJP's ideological family is concerned, they were a marginal force at that time. But it's not that Ambedkar was not critical of the RSS, because I have read myself that the Scheduled Caste Federation of Ambedkar, its manifesto had a line that our party will have nothing to do with forces like the RSS and the communists. So that one line is also there. But the RSS did not have the kind of centrality where Ambedkar would be too critical or engage them too much. In terms of engagement, he had a long engagement with Gandhi and he was critical of Gandhi. But Gandhi also, in a sense, told Nehru to make him the law minister of India, include him in the first cabinet. So yeah, I would say it's a very complex relationship.
Now, shortly after this recording, the Delhi police registered an FIR against Congress leader Rahul Gandhi and others in connection with a scuffle that took place outside the parliament yesterday. Gandhi was booked under several sections of the BNS, including voluntary causing grievous hurt, the use of criminal force, and criminal intimidation. Soon after the scuffle, the BJP alleged that two of its MPs, Pratap Chandra Sarangi and Mukesh Rajput, were injured after being allegedly pushed by opposition MPs as both sides protested over the Ambedkar issue. And next we talk about the recent remarks made by the Allahabad High Court judge, Justice Shekhar Kumar Yadav. Earlier this month, at an event organized by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Justice Yadav made remarks filled with communal slurs, stereotypes and prejudice, specifically targeting the Muslim community.
हमारे यहाँ बच्चा पैदा होता है, बचपन काल से उसको ईश्वर की ओर बढ़ाया जाता है, वेद मंत्र पढ़े जाते हैं, अहिंसा के बारे में ले जाया जाता है, तमाम चीजें बताई जाती हैं। लेकिन आपके यहाँ तो बचपन से बच्चे को सामने रख करके वध किया जाता है पशुओं का। तो आप कैसे अपेक्षा करते हैं कि सहिष्णु होगा वो, उदार होगा वो? तो ये कहने में बिल्कुल गुरेज नहीं है कि हिंदुस्तान है, हिंदुस्तान में रहने वाला बहुसंख्यक के अनुसार ही देश चलेगा। यही कानून है। आप इसको ये कह करके नहीं कह सकते कि हाई कोर्ट के जज होकर के आप ऐसा बोल रहे हैं। कानून तो भैया।
Justice Yadav had been speaking about the Uniform Civil Code and framed it as a Hindu versus Muslim debate. And while we are refraining from repeating some of the slurs he used, in the clip we played, he says that it is taught to us that even an ant should not be killed. That is perhaps why we are tolerant and generous. Why? Because when a child is born in our community, they are taught about God, the Vedas and mantras right from the childhood. They are told about non-violence. But in your community, animals are slaughtered in the presence of children. How do you expect the person to become tolerant and kind? Now his remarks have drawn criticism from opposition parties, who are now preparing to give notice to move a motion for his impeachment in the Rajya Sabha. When we spoke to the Indian Express's legal affairs editor, Apurva Vishwanath, she told us more about it.
So, about Justice Shekhar Yadav, there are a bunch of issues, right? The first is, should judges be talking in these events, especially, university convocations? Events of the bar are one thing, but the Vishwa Hindu Parishad event that also was held in the High Court premises, that is one set of issues. Those are one set of issues. The second issue is what the judge spoke about. So here it is, do judges have free speech? Can they speak what their minds? Yes, all of that is true. But there is also a certain code of conduct for judges. You may not find it in a legislation. It may not be written down. It may not be put up on the notice board of the High Court. But there is a code of conduct that judges adhere to.
So it's more of a norm rather than a law.
It's more of the nature of being a judge. To be impartial, to watch what you say, and also to be a bit reclusive so that you're not influenced by the things happening in the society. So, because the whole point of being a judge is to be impartial and fair. And if you sort of lose that character in a speech or in a judgment or whatever else that you do, then the idea or the rule of law gets affected. It's not about this particular comment of the judge, but the whole set of things that he said. Of course, first the judge starts out by saying why we need a framework for the Uniform Civil Code. And there, yes, of course, that's also something that's mentioned in our Directive Principles of State Policy in the Constitution. It's also something that the Supreme Court has advocated for, all of that. But the tone and tenor of the judge, if you listen to the whole 35-odd-minute speech, the language is characterized by this you versus us. And where he says us as the Hindu majority of this country and a constant othering of the minorities in this country. So he says your religion, your custom, your tradition. And of course he says there are some good Muslims, very benevolently, but some kind of Muslims, who are apparently very extreme or whatever, that's unacceptable. But the larger point of that speech is, forget the words that are hateful and very unparliamentary. But the larger context of that speech is this othering, constantly telling the minorities that you are here because of the largest of the majority. That's the problematic part.
Now, the question inevitably is what can be done about it. Politically, of course, members of parliament in both Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha can move to impeach the judge. And while this process has already begun for Justice Yadav, Apurva tells us that the threshold for successfully doing so is very high.
First of all, you need to have the numbers. The parliament can only remove a judge, which means now in the Rajya Sabha, you need about 50 MPs to move a motion. If it's in the Lok Sabha, you need about 100 MPs to move a motion. Then it is upon the chairperson of the House or the Speaker of the Lok Sabha to accept it. And once that motion is sort of accepted or taken on record, Then there is a committee of inquiry, and, eventually, if the judge is found guilty by that committee of inquiry, then there is a process of removal. All of that's a long shot. We've not had any judge in the history of independent India removed so far.
She says that while a couple of them have come very close, nobody actually has been impeached.
And that's a good thing, that protects the independence of the judiciary. It protects the judiciary from the ever-changing political scenario in the country. All of that's true. And also, the grounds for removal of a judge are just very narrow in our constitution. It's proven misbehavior or incapacity, right? And this proven misbehavior we've only taken to be corruption or, say, sexual harassment so far. It's not gone beyond that. And when you say incapacity, we're actually talking about faulty mental faculties. Because the process of impeachment, which is codified in the Judges Inquiry Act, actually talks about visiting a doctor and having a medical test. So when we say incapacity, we actually talk about someone going senile. Nothing short of that. Of course, in many cases, that's arguable, but, that's a very high bar again. So the political process is one part of it.
The other part, because the impeachment process is so difficult, is the one that involves the judiciary.
The judiciary has evolved some extra constitutional methods dealing with such issues. One is, of course, you transfer the judge, which we see happening very routinely nowadays. So, and then you, of course, you can withdraw work from that judge, move him from this roster to that roster, give him seemingly less important cases.
Basically, you're penalizing the judge for their behavior.
Yeah, but that's also not something that's strictly legal. You're using it as a measure because you can, and as the highest court of the country, the Supreme Court can, but that's not really a fair method of handling these issues. The other, of course, is what we saw happen a couple of months ago in the case of a Karnataka High Court judge who made references to Pakistan when he was talking about a Muslim-dominated neighborhood in Bangalore, right? So that judge, the Supreme Court, in a hearing, censured him and said this is unacceptable. But that's as much as a warning. And if you, like all warnings, you give them too often and they lose their meaning. So Justice Yadav might not be the last person to say these things. So that is the larger issue here. And what can we do? The only thing is, that we ensure better judges are appointed. That at the time of their appointment, we look into their political leanings, we look into their behavior, and we have a stricter scrutiny of who is becoming a judge. Because once you become a judge, it is pretty much a license that you can't easily take away, or you can't take away at all. So that's where we are. There has been a lot of criticism about Justice Yadav, the comments that he made. But also in the last 2 days, we've seen UP Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath come and defend him, sort of attacking the opposition for making this into an issue. So the politics is really playing out here. So it'll have to be seen what happens next in this impeachment process. And the Supreme Court has also said that it is cognizant of this issue and it is going to do something. So we'll again have to see what the Supreme Court does.
Okay, so considering that the judiciary has a kind of informal way, or like you said, an extra constitutional way of handling these matters, is there a need to have a formal way in which the court should be looking at these cases in the future?
The problem is, a High Court judge is a constitutional office bearer. It's not as if your supervisor at work can come in with a stick and say, how can you do this? Justice Yadav, at the end of the day, is a constitutional office holder. So we can talk about processes, in-house mechanisms and all of this, but it really is something much more than all of that, right? Yeah, we can have a formal process, but again, you will just have to keep, doing this every now and then. There is a reason why the judiciary is always considered one step above these politics. Because at the end of the day, the chief minister is a political entity. The prime minister is a political entity. So there was a reason why the judiciary sort of shielded itself from these formal processes because it didn't want any political interference. So if that has to be protected, judges themselves have to look within and see how this affects judicial independence. It's easy to say, yes, let's have a formal method to do this. Let's have a committee and look at, but anybody who's involved in that committee is an influence on the judiciary. And is that a good thing or a bad thing is a much larger question than what Shekhar Yadav has said. And so having said all of this, I think there's a larger, when we talk about judicial independence, right, it's no doubt that every human being, every judge has political views, political leanings. We have about 1,000 High Court judges across the country, more than 1,000. What we are seeing is one Karnataka judge there and one Allahabad High Court judge here. But that's not also the face of the majority of judges in our country. So whatever politics plays out, on how Justice Shekhar Yadav is dealt with, the larger issue is, of course, for the court to look within and try and address these issues. Because Justice Yadav could have said this today. There'll be some other judge who will say something else on the other side of the political spectrum. So it is for the judges to take a call, to be more reflective when they speak in public forum.
And in the end, we talk about a controversy involving an Indian student that dates back to earlier this year. About 6 months ago, a 19-year-old student named Aryan Anand was caught bragging on Reddit about how he managed to secure admission to Lehigh University in the US by completely falsifying his mark sheets and certificates.
So the most shocking was that in order to secure the scholarship, he faked his father's death. So there was a death certificate that he produced for that to kind of make a case that he could not finance his education in the US. And I think, if I'm not wrong, he did secure a full ride for that.
That's the Indian Express's Ritika Chopra.
But of course, what was very interesting was that the Reddit post went into really sort of minute details of how he did what he did. So, how he kind of changed his marks on his class 10 mark sheet, how he changed his marks in his class 12 mark sheet, created an ID in the name of his educational institution, kind of to mail the institution from that ID. So, of course, it was pretty elaborate, the entire thing that he orchestrated, and the university did fall for it. And we did break that story that it was actually Lehigh discovered this because there was a whistleblower which was reported at the time when this was first reported in the US media. But we first reported the fact that the whistleblower was actually a 19-year-old Indian B.Tech student like Aryan Anand who got caught. But the fact that how it was actually a moderator of that Reddit thread who, after reading this post, actually, kind of pieced together this entire puzzle by following all the posts made anonymously from that handle, and then eventually reporting this to Lehigh University. And they did reach out to this 19-year-old student, the B.Tech student who is from Faridabad. And we did break that story. But yeah, this story kind of made waves on the internet just by virtue of the fact that, the scale of the fraud that Aryan Anand had perpetuated in order to get admission.
After the university found out about this, Aryan was removed from the campus and was charged on multiple accounts, including forgery and tampering of records.
And an immigration judge had issued his removal from the country. Essentially, he was deported. The order must have come sometime in late June, but we were in touch with the department, with the US authorities there, and we were officially told that Aryan was deported to India on the 15th of August.
Now, back then, the university, considered one of the best in the US, issued a boilerplate response to the matter. But last week, in a conversation with Ritika, senior university official Sabrina Yedlichka shared what happened after the university discovered the fraud.
So she basically essentially spoke about how, it was a very somber day on campus. And of course, it led to a moment of self-reflection where they also wanted to understand that what would really drive an applicant or a student to do that. And and they did try and figure out if there is a way that they can tweak, I wouldn't say image, but how would a university present itself to the student to avoid that level of paranoia, which would have driven a student to actually do this. But she also said that maybe the attraction of receiving a scholarship fund in the US also, is pretty strong. And if you feel you don't have the actual credentials for it, by that I mean the grades for it. So maybe, that temptation could have compelled a student to take that step. So, in the interview, she kind of did urge applicants to let their application present a more a more human side to the applicant. That she said that grades are not the only thing that they go by. But at the same time, there have been some lessons for the universities and they are taking some steps to strengthen their admissions process.
This includes roping in a third-party agency to review official documents and transcripts submitted by the students.
So she did mention agencies like WES, which is short for the World Education Services, and another agency called NACE. And these are agencies essentially which provide their professional service and help universities in verifying these transcripts. Currently, the student has to bear the cost of providing a WES verified transcript to the university. So she was saying that, they are in the process of speaking with these agencies to figure out if there is a way to kind of reduce the cost that an applicant has to bear. I mean, she did say that there was a work in progress, but that's another thing. Aside from strengthening their training process for their admissions team, this is another intervention that they are planning, where maybe applicants in future for a price would have to get, before they submit the application, would have to first get their transcripts verified by this agency and then submit it to the university.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.